Do you feel like you're working hard to lose weight, but you can't get this jerk to budge? That's because you're doing too much. And I know you're doing too much because I couldn't get that jerk to move either until I quit following popular fat loss advice that made me gain weight. So in this video, I'll show you 4 surprising things I stopped doing to lose 50 pounds. But before I show you the habits I had to quit, you first have to understand cortisol and how it affects fat storage. In simple terms, cortisol, which is the stress hormone, is produced by the adrenal glands which sit on top of each kidney. Whenever you're stressed, cortisol is increased and released into your bloodstream. While some daily fluctuations are normal, producing too much or too little leads to health problems and fat storage, especially in your midsection. As you can see by this chart, normal cortisol levels peak around 6 a.m., helping to wake you up. Then they fall at a steady rate throughout the day, preparing your body for a good night's sleep. The cortisol chart for someone like me who reached burnout levels looks much different. There was a good 2 to 3 year period where my cortisol levels began peaking in the middle of the night. That was the stage of my health decline where I'd wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. for no good reason, and then it would take me hours to fall back asleep, if I even got back to sleep before it was time to start the day. Despite being awake since the early hours, I did have energy to work through mid-morning. But by 9, my lack of sleep started catching up with me struggling to keep my eyes open by noon, even after chugging coffee. That exhaustion continued straight through my kids' bedtime routine at 8, with me falling asleep before they did. Not only did this exhausting cycle repeat for years, but it came with all sorts of health problems, including rapid weight regain. It wasn't until I figured out how to get my cortisol levels back on track that I was finally able to stop gaining weight. Once I was ready to start losing, this time I had to take a more gentle approach. But even if you haven't reached these stress extremes yet, that doesn't mean it won't happen. Especially if you keep following all of the same bad weight loss advice that got me here in the first place. The first thing I had to stop was the very thing most people increase to combat extreme exhaustion. But even if you're not taking the supplement to wake up, it's still a popular way to decrease appetite, which means you could unknowingly be on the same cortisol burnout track. Let's use this chart to show how I found myself in complete burnout. Since most nights I was tossing and turning by 3, once I finally drugged myself out of bed, starting the day with caffeine was a must. Even though I was already starting the day with a higher than normal cortisol spike, adding a stimulant into the mix pushed it even higher. Once my energy began tanking due to a faster drop than normal, I'd spike cortisol again with even more caffeine, which is a pattern I followed throughout the day since every time my energy dropped, I picked it right back up because I had things to do. While adding more caffeine is initially effective for increased energy, the effect wears off as your body adapts to any stimulant. If you don't continue increasing your dose, you won't get the same energy boost. This leads most people to consume even more caffeine. When you overdo caffeine for too long, this can lead to a big spike and crash where no amount of caffeine can save you. That's the exact place I found myself in where I'd fall asleep directly after drinking a cup of coffee. It wasn't until I cut out most of my daily caffeine that I was able to get my cortisol levels back on track. But how did I do this, since cutting caffeine to 0 leads to withdrawal symptoms like headaches, fatigue, irritability, and more? Instead of stopping all caffeine completely, I cut my dose in half, only having a morning coffee and then another small boost before my workout. In order to reset my cortisol, I continued cutting caffeine down from 600 plus milligrams per day to around 100 milligrams, which I saved for my mid-morning workout. After allowing my body time to adjust, I was eventually able to boost energy in the early afternoon with green tea, which is more gentle than a cup of coffee. Since green tea still has caffeine, I was careful not to drink it after noon, which is 9 to 10 hours before my bedtime. These days, I do use caffeine as a strategic part of my fat loss plan since it boosts energy and suppresses appetite. I keep my intake around 300 milligrams most days, never exceeding 500 milligrams in a day. I stop all caffeine by noon, which includes drinks like Diet Coke, since that has caffeine too. If you take fat burners, keep an eye on those since most fat burners contain large doses of stimulants to suppress appetite. While you may get the initial effect you want, this strategy can quickly lead to cortisol burnout. Also, fat burners don't really burn fat, so you probably don't need to take them. Since caffeine tolerance builds up, there are times I lower myself back down to that 100 milligram level for a few weeks. I give my body time to readjust, and then I slowly build back up to enjoy the fat loss benefits that caffeine provides. But cutting back on caffeine is only one piece of the cortisol lowering puzzle, because there's other popular fat loss hacks you're following that are raising your cortisol levels through the roof. The next habit I had to quit was really tough since it was something that I'd been practicing for close to a decade. Since so many influencers deem it the holy grail of fat loss, I was scared to leave this strategy behind, because how else would I control my appetite? Even though all of these influencers banded together to convince dieters that this is the weight loss miracle they've been missing, following this advice completely wrecked my stress hormones. But just like all of these other cortisol spiking strategies, my downfall didn't happen overnight. It took years for my hormones to tank, leading me to believe that I was doing the right thing. Let's go back to my intermittent fasting roots to explain how this strategy played a significant role. Even though fasting is a stressor, at first it was a good stressor which helped me lose weight consistently, especially since not eating for longer periods helped control my appetite. The thing is, fasting for 12 hours, which meant I mostly fasted overnight, wasn't all that much different from the plan that I naturally followed. So while the weight loss was there, it was pretty slow. Following various influencer advice, I continued pushing my fast longer to 14 hours, then 16, which did help speed up weight loss. Once I thought about how much weight I still wanted to lose, the steady weight loss I experienced at 16 hours wasn't fast enough. So I continued pushing daily fasts to 18 hours and then 20, sometimes going an entire 24 hours without a single drop of food. And the scale rewarded me for my efforts. But one day, I noticed the migraines I experienced most of my life were becoming much more frequent, which was exhausting. So even though I wasn't eating much, I also wasn't moving much, which at first caused my weight loss to stall, but that was soon followed by the scale completely reversing directions. Fast forward to 50 pounds of regained weight, while also experiencing migraines and exhaustion so extreme that following any diet plan wasn't even an option. That's when I learned that my stress levels were completely maxed out. Enforcing my body through long periods of fasting made the situation even worse. So how did I eventually recover from completely crashing my adrenals with such extreme measures? I stopped fasting. But since I was brainwashed into believing that fasting was the only way, it took some time to come to terms that eating breakfast wasn't only okay, but it was mandatory if I ever wanted to get my health back. If intermittent fasting is part of your plan, I'm not saying that you need to quit or else. But if you're of the mindset that extreme fasts are a great idea to speed up fat loss, then you are in for a rude awakening. Even though you may be losing weight on the scale with more extreme measures, weight loss and fat loss are two very different things. Whenever you rely on starving the fat off your body with long periods of fasting, you are losing a ton of muscle in the process, which is the worst thing you can do for long-term results. Most people who fast 18 plus hours per day don't end up eating enough calories or protein to keep the muscle they have, let alone having the energy to build even more metabolism boosting muscle. This drastically slows your metabolism, leading to rebound weight gain that is impossible to lose. And we still haven't gotten into how fasting through meals spikes cortisol even higher, contributing to the cortisol burnout that leads to even more fat storage, which can leave you exactly where I found myself 5 years ago, spending thousands of dollars trying to figure out why I always felt so bad, wondering if I'd ever feel healthy again. Which brings me to the next thing I had to stop doing if I ever wanted to get my cortisol levels back on track. For more than 30 years, I scoured magazines, books, podcasts, and videos for the latest diet hacks to get rid of this jerk. And most of the strict hacks I discovered worked with me sometimes dropping an entire size in less than a month. But it was never long before I found myself quickly regaining everything I lost, often ending up even fatter than when I started, even while sticking to strict diet rules. So how did I finally get rid of this while remaining the same healthy size year after year? I quit listening to popular diet influencers, especially the influencers who've made it their mission to shame every last food that brings me joy. Because by the time you're done following all of the strict rules, you're not left with a whole lot of options. Don't you know that chicken is a dirty animal? Some influencers even leave you eating nothing at all for days at a time. Sure, you need to make better choices than gummy bears for breakfast, but if you really want gummy bears, eat them. Just not for breakfast. Save some room for a few gummy bears as an after-dinner treat, but only if they fit into your calorie budget, and only if you ate enough protein that day, and only if having just a few doesn't trigger a binge that you can't stop. That's the reason I wait until after dinner for any treat. Since I spent the entire day filling up on the nutrients my body needs, enjoying a small treat actually stays a small treat. I don't end up craving and binging crap foods for the rest of the night. But if I continue demonizing these foods like so many diet influencers teach you to do, that completely changes the story. Because telling yourself that your favorite foods are strictly off limits makes you want them even more. And what do you think these constant cravings do to your stress levels? How many times have you fought the internal battle of, I really want that, you can't have it, but I really want it, you can't have it. But it's never long before you find yourself face first in the entire bag. Then comes the shame spiral because you wrecked your diet, so you might as well binge on everything that's off limits. Because when will you have the chance to indulge in this kind of stuff once Monday hits and you vow to diet even harder? Whereas if you just saved a little room in your calorie budget in the first place, you could have been perfectly fine with a small serving and then moved on with your day. There's no guilt since you stuck to your calorie budget, and there's no shame spiral since you quit demonizing foods. You finally realize that it's how many calories you eat that determines how much weight you lose, not steering clear of every last gram of sugar on the planet. Which means you need to stop following all of these influencers who are standing in the middle of the grocery store like crazies, screaming food manufacturers are trying to kill you with their poisonous foods. While they're not entirely wrong, at least be mindful and demure about shooting your B-roll in public.
12 seconds later.
Not demure.
Stop allowing every influencer you scroll past tell you that every food that brings you joy is sabotaging your results. Because for every one of these influencers screaming that cookies are bad, there's another dozen of them preaching that apples are the devil himself. All biblical references aside, apples are filled with fiber and other nutrients that keep you fuller for longer on less calories. But what about the blood sugar spike? If you're worried about a potential blood sugar spike that comes with a snack that's made up of mostly carbs, just have a protein boost before biting into your apple.
We're going to live on! We're going to survive!
You're gonna lose weight. But even after I quit allowing every Tom, Dick, and Harry diet influencer to stop dictating what I ate, there was another behavior I had to quit to get back into this healthy body that I love. And this one was a doozy, since this was a behavior that I strictly adhered to for over 30 years. For anyone who thinks that I don't look old enough to struggle through yo-yo diets for 30 years, let me remind you that I just used the word doozy. Back when I first hopped on this decades-long diet train, dietary fat was the devil and cardio was king, which meant I lost weight by running as fast as I could up and down the blocks of my square mile town, while spending my free time adding up how many grams of fat were in every chip I ate. Decades worth of fad diets later, I somehow ended up even worse off than when I began. But I knew that I followed every strict diet rule of plan after plan that was guaranteed to work, so how did I even get here? In case you didn't catch my foreshadowing, I constantly hopped from diet to diet. Long before social media was even a twinkle in Mark Zuckerberg's eye, in fact, I'm not even sure he was born yet. I was hopping from diet to diet, praying that one of these miracle plans would finally work. Whenever I didn't drop the 20 pounds that miracle diet promised 2 weeks in, I jumped into an even stricter plan. Once that diet was too hard to stick to, I dropped everything, spent days researching a new plan, and then began another diet that was way too strict, but guaranteed to work. What I didn't understand is that any plan that guarantees quick results, the plan that comes with even faster weight regain, once it becomes too hard to stick to. It also took me 30 years to come to the realization that sustainable fat loss takes a really long time. Like, think about how long you think it should take to lose 50 pounds. If I lose 10 pounds a month for 5 months, that's 50 pounds. And then double that. And it could even take longer. But constantly jumping into strict weight loss plans to speed things up isn't the answer, since that's how never-ending diet hopping begins. Which means you gotta have patience, especially since jumping from diet to diet just serves to feed into the cortisol junkie behavior that most dieters develop. You know you're a diet cortisol junkie if every time you're not losing fast enough, or whenever a diet gets too hard to stick to, you drop everything you're doing to learn brand new diet rules. Then you frantically buy everything you need to stick to the strict diet while tossing out anything that's not on your plan. And that's not all, because you also firmly believe that more is better, which leaves you exercising for hours on end while eating tiny meals that aren't even fit for a toddler. But here's the thing, even though junkies always get their fix, they stay stuck right where they are pretty much forever. The trick to establishing habits that bring long-term results is to make the smallest changes possible that elicit the most amount of change. So instead of drastically slashing calories, carbs, or even cutting out entire meals right off the bat, why not start by cutting a few hundred calories from your maintenance calorie target? And instead of slowing your metabolism with hours of intense cardio, maybe this time just build your metabolism up with a simple walking routine where you start where you are and build up to 8,000 or 10,000 steps a day. Because if you want fat loss that stands the test of time, you have to develop habits that also stand the test of time. Working smarter, not harder, is the key to a fat loss plan that comes with sustainable results. Having the patience to establish lifelong habits while thinking of results in terms of months and years, instead of desperately attempting to force change in only days or weeks, isn't only how you get from here to here, but it's how you stay here year after year with very little effort. Of course, you won't ever get here if you don't prioritize the right strategies that get you here in the first place. Watch this video next to learn the 5 cheat codes I use to make losing 50 pounds easy. Since they're the same cheat codes I still follow to maintain my 50-pound loss, I'd say it's important that you learn these cheat codes now.